Hi, I'm Karyn Chabot, and this is
Kristy Cohen.
and we're going to be doing a little profile on Ghislaine Maxwell through the eyes of the Veda, through Vedic astrology's perspectives. And we are looking at her history, we're looking at the moment, as well as where this is going.
So for those of you who may not know who Ghislaine Maxwell is, she is basically has been accused of procuring minors and sexually trafficking minors for Jeffery Epstein. So she's wrapped up in the Jeffery Epstein Scandal and has been his partner and friend for many years. So Karyn and I wanted to take a look at her chart today and just shed some light on where we think why this happened, how did this happen in her life, how did she get to this point, and then also where is this going. So why don't we pull up her birth chart.
Here's Ghislaine, a picture of her, and these are some of the accusations that she's been a modern day madame, partner in crime, sex scandals, involved with all kinds of, acts with minors. And here is her blueprint. This is her Jyotish chart. Jyotish is the science of light, and it's another word for Vedic astrology. And this kind of tells us her life patterns, where she's going, why she is who she is. It's a personality profile, an understanding, a deep understanding of her soul contract. And we're going to look at it from as many angles as possible. So you want to?
Yeah. So very interesting chart. Right away, you're going to notice that it is extreme. It's different. There are many planets to be found in the 8th house, which is this stellium of planets here. So there's Mercury, Sun, Mars, and Venus, all in the 8th house. And Venus is the ruling sign. Her lagna or her rising sign goes to the 8th. And she has that Mars-Venus passion combo. And she was born in the star of Rohini. So we'll just talk a little bit about Taurus Lagna or Rohini rising. And as we were doing some research, what I thought was really fascinating was Ghislaine, was born into a very wealthy family. She's considered to be a British socialite. So she had the life, she had the money, she had the means, she had the connections. And she was considered her daddy's favorite.
And the fact that the ruling sign, we call the Lord of the chart, or the ruler of the chart, goes to the 8th house. It's very significant. Look at that 8th house. Even though there's a number 9 on our screen, that's the 9th sign of the zodiac, meaning Sagittarius. But that actual house number is the 8th house. And Kristy will tell you what the meanings of the 8th house are all about, and then we'll discuss her themes in her life, all the 8th house themes that have followed her.
Well, so when I look at this chart, I see an 8th house type of person because, like we said, we have 4 planets there. We have the Lagna Lord there, and we also have the Sun. And all of those planets, except for Mercury, are in the nakshatra of Mula. And Mula is also a difficult nakshatra. Not that Rohini is difficult, but as we'll get into later, we can see that the moon is in Ashlesha with Rahu, which can be a difficult combination.
And we just want to back up a minute. That nakshatra is a Sanskrit word for lunar star or lunar mansion, and we use those 3 terms interchangeably, so don't get confused or thrown off when one of us might say nakshatra and slip up instead of saying lunar mansion or lunar star. And there are 27 lunar stars that we're going to be referring to that are very insightful in everybody's chart, but specifically this chart, this Mula and this Ashlesha is amazingly intense.
Yes. Yeah, and considering the storyline and the life and the karma, it's very fitting. It's not a surprise. So going back to the 8th house, the 8th house Baba, when it goes wrong, it can get into themes of sex scandals, manipulation, hiding out, power struggles, passion, and, just sort of like the dark side of life. Just to mention a few of the themes. It's also a house that shows other people's money.
Yeah.
And Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a publishing mogul in in England and extremely wealthy. And, you know, she has definitely been the, what's the word I'm looking for? The heir of all this wealth and this money. And, you know, sometimes people live off other people, can be sort of an eighth house theme. So if you have a loaded eighth house, you know, you might be one who acquires money of other people through inheritance or through scandal even. So
windfalls, even through, you know, an insurance claim or money that you didn't earn and money that wasn't necessarily a gift. So that's what the eighth house represents. So she is someone who was born into money, and it wasn't her earned money. So there's a lot of money around her because we have 4 planets in the other people's money's house.
Yeah. Rohini is also, you know, a luxury star. So it's also common that people that have Rohini in their charts can come into considerable wealth, or at least love money, love to be around money. Yeah. So Venus is the ruler of the first house and the 6th house, as you can see here. Venus is ruling Taurus and it's ruling Libra. It goes to the 8th house. So this shows an interest in 8th house themes. You know, it also shows a little bit of trouble because the 6th house can bring lawsuits and obstacles and enemies. And then the 8th house can bring those scandals. And we see this playing out in Ghislaine's life. And I think it really started in 2015. And Karyn and I, we'll talk about the dashas later and what's going on. But she is sort of in this Mars period right now. And Mars is activating this 8th house. It's activating the planets that are also sitting here. And like I said, her Venus, her Lagna Lord is here. Let's talk about, before we get to the moon, why don't we talk a little bit about Mula. And Mula is a nakshatra that is said to bring destruction, right? It's
Yes.
It can be a destructive nakshatra. It can really almost obliterate everything. It is also a star that's associated with having a lot of money. It can bring a lot, it has the power to bring a lot of money. And in this case, yes, indeed, it did bring a lot of money into her life. But at some point there can be a reversal. And that's the destructive quality of this energy, is that it's now, as we can see, her father passed away in, I think it was, I forget when, but let's say maybe.
It was a scandalous death as well. So yeah, she has scandals following her all over. We can talk about the father's death another time, but it was a scandalous death. And that 8th house, like we said, represents scandals, but it also represents, you know, sex even. So it's a sexual house. It's hidden sex. It's even dirty sex. It's animalistic sex. Manipulative, yeah, scandalous sex. Yeah. So there's 4 planets of the 9. There's 9 planets in total. 4 of the 9 go to the 8th house. So that gives her a lot of flavor of 8th house scandalous sex. And her father is represented by the sun sitting in the 8th. And it's with Mars, which is a very challenging, feisty planet. And it's actually the planetary cycle she's in currently. That means this 8th house is really ignited. But when sun burns on top of Mars in the 8th house, it's a kuja dosha, which is a Sanskrit term meaning 2 planets that align together that cause a lot of
heat.
Yes, but in a way that is so inflammatory that it can burn itself out, and it can give rise to perversion as well as a lot of money. As a matter of fact, the Vanderbilts here that owned the Breakers Mansion in Newport, the father, the great, whatever his name was, Mr. Vanderbilt, had a kuja dosha, and his place burned down. That the Breakers Mansion must have burned down 3 or 4 times in 1 decade. And so they're prone to fires. So this is not an easy life spread that we have here. This blueprint's a challenging one, and Mula, which Kristy wants to dig into, which I think we should, is one of the 27 mansions, that lunar mansions that's very, I call it malefic, giving rise to rags to riches, riches to rags, destruction, digging into the root and the nitty gritty of things. It's a lot of scandalous activity and and not an easy one to get through. It's not a steady, smooth sailing,
Yeah.
glittery, no.
It can be if it's used in the right way, but it is a powerful energy.
When it goes to the 8th house, it just, the combination can be challenging.
Yes, yes. And just so we'll back up a little bit with the father. What's fascinating about the father is that, like Karyn was mentioning, with Sun going to the 8th, even the father's death was scandalous. But so we see that with Sun in the 8th. He was found floating outside of nearby his yacht. So he was just floating upright in the water. He apparently had drowned. But even Ghislaine herself stated that her father would never kill himself. So he was caught up with a lot of fraud and scandal around money. And he, I think we could probably say that he was most definitely murdered. Now, once he passed away, he was completely disgraced because all this information came up about him, and he wasn't living his dharma, he was adharmic, and so there was all this scandal and disgrace around his death. And that was a huge hit on Ghislaine because she loved her father. That was, he was everything to her. And if you look at father in the chart, we look at the number 10 here. This is Capricorn. This is the 9th house of father. And this is the house that we look to in the Vedic system. So there's a couple things here. Now we see a debilitated, we see the Lord of Capricorn, Saturn here, strong in its own sign, giving, that wealth and that fortune and publishing actually for 9th house. That, and then we also see a debilitated Jupiter, which shows that he may not have been the most moral or ethical person. And
as well as her too.
Yeah, and this is also this is both her and her father. And then we see K2 here, that loss of father.
And it gives the, belief system her what she thought was right. Because
she
Jupiter
learned
is
from
all
her father
as well. Yeah, she did. She must have received her ethics, her value system from the father, even maybe genetically or environmentally. However, this Jupiter is debilitated as well. It has afflicted by K2, which is the south node of the moon. And when one of the nodes of the moon, which are the movers and the shakers, and they bring lessons in life, and they're karmic, and they
also
can
difficult energy.
Yes, combination of the debilitated Jupiter with the K2 gives rise to someone who may not feel that they are making wrong or unethical choices. They may feel like, hey, yeah, this is the way life is. This is what everybody should be doing. When in fact, they're just not understanding what normal is or what ethical is. And it's not her fault. She wasn't scheming to be unethical. It's just, we can see her very nature is that her discernment around what's ethical, what's unethical is afflicted. We see that clearly here in the 9th house. And the 9th house generally is father, but it's also the house of dharma. It's house of ethics and values and religion. So even spirituality. So she's got an affliction here at the root of her value system, at the root of her genetic makeup. She's working from something that isn't completely aligned with the rest of society.
Well said. Yeah, so what were we going to talk about next? So let's look at the moon, because the moon is the telltale of all charts, because it's the manas. It shows the mind. It shows our thinking, right? And
our emotional body, and the mother too.
And I was going to talk about a little bit about conditioning, because this is how Ghislaine was conditioned. This chart is a picture of her conditioning, and we can look at that a little more through nakshatras, but that I think is more than we were going to take on today. But we definitely want to look at the moon. She was born into a Mercury dasha, so you see right away she was born into the 8th house conditioning.
Yeah.
And when we look at the moon from the 8th house, it goes to the 3rd, so 1, 2, 3, but also the 3rd house is 8th from the 8th. So if we count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So again, we have another 8th house theme. We have a double whammy 8th house theme. And then another difficult combination is Moon Rahu. And another difficult nakshatra is Ashlesha. So Ghislaine took on a lot in this lifetime. This is a very difficult chart. I personally would not want to have this chart. I don't know if I could steer this chart in the right direction. And it looks like the chart itself and all the karma just got steered right into that 8th house. Not easy to climb out of a hole. So Ashlesha, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about Moon Rahu? And
well, a lot of people who have Moon Rahu have an afflicted emotional body, just the way we see Ketu as the south node afflicting Jupiter and the ethical body and the ethical fields of living. The moon governs emotions and the mind, and it's very powerful. It's what we call swa in its own sign. It's nearly full, so it's quite bright. And in Ashlesha, it's very malefic because Ashlesha is like the serpent. It's a sarpa situation where sarpa is Sanskrit for serpent, and Rahu is the head of the serpent, which is the north node of the moon, sitting right on top of her emotional body. So she emotionally may have felt derailed and destabilized many times, but it could also mean that there's a affliction, or I use that word a lot today, but there's a impediment or a something in her emotional body that could be likened to a sociopath, where they're unable to feel guilt or shame. So with that, it's not that there's a manipulating, like I am now choosing to be a cold, mean, bad person. It's more that in her emotional body, she has like I'm not finding
like
the words,
a
but
hole. Let's just call it maybe like a hole, a tear, like a tear in the fabric.
Yeah, there's a tear, there's a rip, so the emotional body isn't fully. I lost that. I'll let you take over, because I know what I'm trying to say, but the words aren't coming out.
Yeah, so, well, let's just talk about a little bit about Ashlesha. Now, Ashlesha is a serpent. The deity is a serpent. And so these people are known on the darker side of this nakshatra to be seductive, deceptive, manipulative, scandal, and intrigue. Okay, now it's an amazing nakshatra for research and for kundalini and for transformation. But on the darker side, you know, because that Rahu is there as well, and you have Saturn 7 away aspecting it, and then you have the debilitated Jupiter, which is, you know, holding back on the morals and the ethics, and Ketu. This is just a setup, again, for someone who's able just to rationalize what they're doing. If they are manipulating or taking a walk on the dark side, let's say. So not only do we have Ashlesha Nakshatra, Moon Rahu, but then it's also placed 8th from the 8th. And even the 3rd house is, you know, it's a house where we feel that sexual energy, the ego, it's a very egotistical house. We're driven by our desires and what we want. And we have a lot of courage to put ourselves out there and go get them. So she may very well have felt, what I think in the chart of, you know, Rohini is very attractive, very beautiful, very smooth. It's also a Sarpa nakshatra. Its yoni is the snake. And I just feel like, and I heard this with a lot of testimony with the girls, there are 6 accounts of alleged, you know, sex trafficking and procuring of a minor that are pitted against her right now. And when I watched the documentary on Jeffery Epstein, Filthy Rich, a lot of the girls said, you know, they normalized it. They made us feel, and that's very manipulative, very 8th house, very Ashlesha, to manipulate something, and very snake-like to make it feel normal. And she could have, you know, on some level, I even feel like she may have been a victim of Jeffrey Epstein's, and she just got caught up in it. After her father's death, she sort of ran into the arms of Jeffrey Epstein. She left England, she moved to New York City and met Jeffrey, and they just, you know, hit it off for years. They were lovers, and then they became best friends, and then she basically became, you know, his madam or pimp, if you want to put it that way.
I heard she starved herself a lot. Maybe she had some anorexia, and there is something to that where she wanted to be attractive in that young way because he liked the very young. He was attracted to the thinner, you know, and they're usually thin and girl-like body. So to try to not eat, starve yourself so that you have that girl-like body, so he could be attracted to her. I think that may have been the demise of the relationship, was that she was aging and couldn't keep up with that girl-like body, and maybe that's when it turned into the platonic friendship.
And then she became, I mean, she was on payroll. She actually worked for
Yeah,
him.
they had a great partnership, friendship that, you know, became platonic. And we're looking at, I'm going to look at that Jupiter.
Well, I want to,
you want to go over? Okay, go ahead.
I think what you were touching on was when we were researching Ghislaine, sadly, and this is very, you know, it's Mula, it's Ashleisha, it's the third house. So we're going to look at the third house of siblings. Now she was 8, I think she had 8 siblings or 9 siblings. And so she, 2 days before she was born, her brother, she had a 15-year-old brother who had got into a car accident. All right, we're talking about siblings, we're talking about car accidents, that's all third house themes, and was comatose until for years, and then eventually passed away. And the mother was stated, and this is on Wiki, I don't know if it's true or not, but it definitely makes sense in this birth chart.
Yeah.
That she, as a child, as a 2-year-old, was starving herself and not eating. She was anorexic as a toddler, which I find very odd, but I don't know.
With a debilitated Jupiter, doing medical astrology, that can give rise to anorexia. It also aspects her 5th house of children. So there's a debilitation, and Jupiter is a karaka, or an indicator for children. So it is going into the 5th house of children because Jupiter aspects 9 away. So we have 9 away from where it sits, sitting in the house of children. It's bothering the house of children, we can say, where it's not giving, you know, good juju to that house, where she might see children in an offbeat way and have an offbeat relationship with them, because you know that Jupiter is all about dogma and ethics, and then that 9th house also is about spirituality, ethics, and dharma, and then having it be debilitated and aspecting to the 5th house of children, it can mean that she just has a little twisted view of relationships with children.
Yep. So what else do we want to talk about?
Mars is like yeah.
Let's talk about, so where is this going? So what happened with Ghislaine is she had been hiding out. Jeffrey Epstein was basically in the hot seat for years, but let's say 2015, they were on his tail, and he was definitely, the law was catching up with him. At that time, he had cut some kind of a deal, and she was in on this deal. So whatever he agreed to, it was agreed that Ghislaine would be okay, or, you know, not involved. So that was part of a plea bargain that he made, that she would be safe. But then he was arrested in November of 2019, or maybe it was the summer, maybe September, August, September. And then he committed suicide, and or he
could have been killed.
Yeah, another scandalous death around men, that 8th house, showing up in that 8th house for her. And she, I just lost my train of thought.
We were going to the Mars, me too. Mars and the 12th house.
Yeah, so now, so what's happening with her now? So from 2015 until now, she was hiding out. Nobody could find her. Very Ashleisha, very 8th house. And 8th house is like a cavity, it's a hole.
Great place to hide.
And, you know, I always find Ashleisha and Cancer, either rising or moon people, love their privacy, very private people. So she was able to move around house to house and hide. And they finally caught up with her a couple weeks ago in New Hampshire. She was in a house that she had bought, a beautiful, you know, property in New Hampshire, and they showed up, they arrested her. Now, the last I heard, she is, appears that maybe she's working with the FBI, maybe she's trying to strike a deal, or I don't know, there's talk, you know, she's also friends with Prince Andrew, and Prince Andrew is another person of interest who's been caught up in this drama. So we'll see where that goes. But our kind of question today is like, is she going to jail? Will she get off? What's going to happen to her? Will she disappear like Epstein? So we want to look at Dasha. We want to look at
Dasha means cycle.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Just making sure that we don't lose those that don't know Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So I'll interpret the Sanskrit while she's going. Keep going.
Okay, so Dasha is how we look at which planet is giving its karma at any given time. And as you can see from this table over here, the Vimshottari Dasha that she's currently in is, it looks like Mars Mercury.
Yeah.
Okay, so she's in a Mars Mercury Dasha. There's a Maha Dasha and then there's a Bhukti. So Maha is the
great cycle.
The great cycle, and this is the
smaller cycle, but still very impactful.
Yeah. And so what we can see is what we want to look at is, well, what is Mars ruling? Well, first of all, Mars is going to the 8th house, not Dustana, a trick house. So we got the trick house here, and it's ruling another trick house, meaning difficult house of loss, house of imprisonment, house of jail, scandal, all of that. So these themes are happening right now. If we look at the other house that Mars is ruling, it's fascinating. It's the 7th house of relationships. So possibility of getting imprisoned, right? The 12th house because of relationships. And then let's pull going to the 8th house of
scandals, death, even death-like experiences.
And then also Mercury, let's look at Mercury. Mercury is ruling the 5th house of children and the 2nd house of, you know, family and her status, her status, her assets. She's probably losing assets, losing money. And so all of this, of course, is activating all of these planets here in the 8th house, and not to mention the nakshatra Mula. So we're seeing now a reversal of fortune. We're seeing this person who was born into royalty, basically, and, you know.
So what happens when we go through these dashas or cycles is the planet that you're under, as far as what cycle, that house that it owns or sits in gets lit up, becomes ignited, becomes front and center. And there's 12 houses. So the house that's being lit up for her currently is, well, it's the 8th house because Mars is in the 8th house, but Mars owns the 12th house and it owns the 7th house. So as she was saying, but the meanings of the 8th and the 12th house, they are trick houses, as she said, but specifically the 12th house is the last house. So if you can imagine logically, any last house would mean, in just the word last, is telling. It's the end. It's the sort of loss. It's about loss, and it's about anything hidden. It's also a moksha house, meaning liberation house, but liberation through loss. It represents institutes, imprisonments, hiding, solitude, and many other things overseas.
I think when the 12th Lord is going to the 8th house,
yes,
it's not a happy loss. It's not like I'm giving my money away and, you know, or I'm retiring, or I'm at the end of my life, or I'm going to go sit in an ashram and just meditate.
It's not going to go that way because it goes to the 8th.
This is something that's taken from you. And that's the scandal of the 8th house. It gets taken from you and it's unexpected. And you got to pay the price. You got to
pay the piper. So she may end up going to prison because she is in Mars cycle until 2023, which ignites the 12th house of prison. So that is likely for her. And the Bhuktis, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I was just kind of looking down the road. So then in, let's see, April 2021, she probably won't get sentenced before then. Then she's in a Mars Ketu. Now, again, Ketu is Mokshakaraka. It's the planet of liberation. But again, what kind of liberation? Maybe liberation from this debilitated Jupiter, in that, you know, the whole point of living is to grow, to evolve, to, you know, and this is her karma, right? This is what she is working through. This is what has been dealt out. This is like her cards that she's come to play, so to speak. And she has got to figure this out. And hopefully, um, there can be some healing around this. There can be some acknowledgement of maybe, you know, wrongdoing. And she can get through it. I mean, I have the utmost compassion for all these girls and all these people that were harmed, but I also feel compassion for her. I mean, this is really coming to a head, and
It's a sad situation.
very sad.
Yeah.
Very sad. So Karyn and I wanted to just sort of, you know, look at how does something like this happen? You know, how does someone just
Go from riches to rags, and from the spotlight to scandals to imprisonment, from, you know, she was charitable.
Born in a mansion.
Yes, she was philanthropic. She tried to do a lot of great things, clean up the ocean. She did a lot of wonderful things. Maybe she really had a really good side to her. She may have impacted people's lives positively. You know, not everybody is a villain 100%, and we're not saying she's a villain at all. It's just this chart doesn't look like a chart that could escape a prison sentence. This looks like when she was going to, as fate would have it, have a Mars activation, it would activate the 12th house of prison, and it's a sort of a likely place that she'll end, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is, because even after that, it goes into the 8th, it goes into the
Rahu.
9th. Yeah, and the Rahu is...
Oh, that was another thing, the layer of the transits. Yeah, so right now up in the sky, we all know that Saturn is sitting here in this nakshatra, right? Or sign of Capricorn, in the sign of the lunar mansion or star of Uttara Ashara. So she's having a Saturn return, and then later Saturn is going to return to that Jupiter. Jupiter is our planet of fortune and luck, but in this case,
it's debilitated.
It's the planet of the 8th house as well. So
it owns the 8th house, yeah.
And then going into Rahu. So Rahu doesn't look much better. It's in that, you know, difficult nakshatra, Ashlesha. And I guess the question is, will she survive jail?
That's what I was wondering, because 8th house, so after she goes to prison, if she does, and I'm hoping, you know, that justice, whatever justice is, it unfolds. If she's guilty, that it be that she is given the chance. Well, I'm not going to even go there.
Chance to,
to make lemonade out of her lemons. We'll just leave it like that. But it looks like it continues after she goes to jail. The continuing on in that cycle of Mars until 2023 still goes to the 9th and the 8th, which isn't giving any rise to a liberated, you know, oh, woo, I'm free. It looks like she may end up there for a while.
Because Saturn will be right on that Jupiter. Let's say if there is any fortune and blessings of Jupiter, right, aspecting that moon, which means that Jupiter is looking over here at the moon and Rahu. But, you know, because Saturn will be basically on top of it when the sentencing is doled out, it just doesn't look favorable. So there you have it. And then actually right now, also up in the sky, Jupiter just backed up into this 8th house. So it's expanding the scandal. It was like, first it was Jeffrey Epstein, you know, in September, and it was big news. And then Filthy Rich came out, the documentary. And then it was quiet for about 6 months, and now we have a big scandal again in the news, and that's that Jupiter going back into her 8th house and expanding all of this energy here. So anyhow, the amazing vidya of Jyotish, just to shed light on our lives, is incredible. It's powerful, and we. Karyn and I offer workshops. Check out, why don't you give me your website, because we have ongoing workshops, we have ongoing webinars that we do, and if you're interested at all, it's a treasure of knowledge, and it leads to self-knowledge. And with this self-knowledge, like, had Ghislaine known this about herself, You know, she could have worked with these energies differently. So that
Yeah.
said, thank you for tuning in. And what's your website and where can people find out more information?
KarynChabot.com. So Karen's with a Y, Karyn, Chabot, Chabot. And Kristy and I teach together. We're teaching an 8-week course on the introduction to Jyotish in this September 2020. And there's no prerequisite. Anyone can join. And it really is a way to discover who you are and how to make the best of your chart, to learn, you know, your gifts and your lessons. And if Ghislaine and I, if we could have had a chat with Ghislaine 10 years ago, we might have consulted with her that this, what she was choosing with Jeffrey, might not end well. And if she could have taken her eighth house energy to a different place, a different way, because eighth house has some good meanings as well. Then if she would have listened, we might have been able to help her to avoid, and that's one of the first lines in the ancient Shastras, the texts, is to avert the danger before it comes. So that's the beauty of learning the Veda and learning Jyotish. Thank you for listening.